Okay, let's dive right in. Literally everything you've ever been taught about the Industrial Revolution is probably a lie. Seriously, we all picture brilliant men in white coats, right? We imagine elite scientists and pristine laboratories handing us the modern world on a silver platter. Well, guess what? They absolutely did not. Today, in this explainer, we are completely destroying a massive historical myth.
So, did science actually build the modern world? History books love to credit the elite academics. They confidently claim that places like Oxford and Cambridge sparked the British economic explosion. It sounds amazing, right? It sounds totally logical. But the hard data? It completely slaps this narrative in the face. It is a total fabrication.
And this infographic brilliantly illustrates exactly why. 20%. By meticulously analyzing thousands of historical patent records and biographies, researcher Zorina Khan found this pathetic magic number. Before the year 1870, barely 20% of the great inventors had any formal scientific training at all. The vast majority of them had absolutely no science degrees, no elite academies, zero theoretical background. The whole "scientists saved us" theory? It's statistically dead on arrival.
Part 1. The Great Scientific Myth. Dismantling the elitist illusion.
Moving to Part 2. Who actually created the world? The rise of the practical artisan. Because if those brilliant scientists didn't create our modern prosperity, who actually did the heavy lifting? Well, look at this bar chart. A massive chunk of the greatest inventors in history came from deeply modest working-class backgrounds. We are talking about skilled artisans, everyday manufacturers, gritty, boots-on-the-ground workers. This completely shatters the elite narrative. They didn't have fancy academic titles, but man, they produced incredible, world-changing results.
So how did they actually do it? It was a simple, powerful engine. Step 1, you see a local problem. Step 2, you use common sense. Step 3, you tinker and test. And Step 4, you patent and profit. That is the true engine of the Industrial Revolution. No complex theories required. In fact, the legendary inventor James Naismith flat out said engineering was simply, quote, common sense applied to the use of materials. Period.
Basically, apprenticeship beat academia, hands down. Take titans like Sir Joseph Wilson Swan. He didn't lounge around in ivy-covered halls. He relied on a gritty pharmacy apprenticeship. He learned by actually doing. He went to night school. Practical trial and error beat theoretical physics every single time. It was dirty, it was exhausting, and you know what? It worked absolute miracles.
All right, Part 3. The lie of elite education and why Oxford and Cambridge were actually useless. Now, if the working artisans were out there building the modern world, what on earth were the ultra-rich universities doing? The answer is honestly worse than nothing. As you can see here, elite schools obsessed over ancient liberal classics. They actually harbored an active, snobby disdain for practical science. One frustrated engineer literally noted that Oxford, quote, fears and hates natural science. They offered zero useful knowledge for true, hands-on technological productivity. Zero.
And believe me, it gets so much worse. Check out this donut chart. By the year 1860, the premier scientific club of the era, the Royal Society, was essentially a joke. Nearly half of its members weren't even scientists. 300 of them were just wealthy aristocrats playing dress-up. It was a glorified gentleman's club, utterly, hopelessly detached from the roaring factories that were actually transforming the nation.
Just listen to this scathing quote from the brilliant Charles Babbage. He aggressively slammed the British establishment, stating that anyone wanting scientific fame could just buy it, quote, at the average cost of £10. Unbelievable, right? The scientific establishment was just dripping with rampant nepotism, completely prioritizing honorifics over real, actual innovation.
Let's pivot to Part 4, the magic of market incentives, covering greed, patents, and practical problem solving.
So if academic prestige didn't drive the industrial fire, what did? Well, basic market incentives. There is this romantic fantasy of inventors toiling away purely for medals and the prestige of the Royal Society. But the cold hard data shows these inventors were incredibly sensitive to financial returns. They wanted patents, they wanted money, they wanted commercial profit, pure and simple.
And then came a massive, literal game changer, the 1852 patent reform in Britain. This was revolutionary. They drastically lowered the crushing patent fees. They streamlined the insane bureaucracy. They vigorously protected property rights. This single legal shift completely democratized invention. It just shattered the financial barriers to entry for the common, everyday man.
And this timeline speaks for itself. Before 1852,
we see really slow patent growth. Then, the fees finally drop. Boom! By 1860, there's an absolute, undeniable explosion in patent filings from all classes of society. Even the so-called pure scientists suddenly started filing patents when it became cheaper and easier. Everyone was driven by the undeniable magic of the market.
Which brings us to Part 5, the 1870 turning point, when science finally started to matter. Now, to be completely fair, there is a definitive historical pivot point where the rules of the game do change. Pre-1820, only 1 miserable percent of great inventors had engineering degrees. 1%! But fast forward to the period between 1871 and 1890, it suddenly jumps to over 25%. Formal science and engineering degrees only became truly relevant to great inventors very, very late in the 19th century.
So why the sudden, dramatic shift? 2 words: complex technology. Specifically, the rapid rise of electrical and telecommunications technology. You simply cannot tinker your way into building an electrical grid using common sense alone. When technology finally shifted to these highly complex, invisible fields, formal scientific education finally began to outpace the everyday tinkerer.
Finally, Part 6, the real lesson for today and what developing countries must learn.
Now, you might be asking, why does this history matter right now? Well, because it holds massive, actionable implications for modern developing nations. Today, these countries are constantly pressured to dump their scarce resources into costly elite degrees, chasing high technology. But the data screams the exact opposite. They should be aggressively focusing on incremental, local creativity, flexible, everyday problem solving. Because as history proves, that is what actually builds a rock-solid economic foundation.
Thomas Jefferson actually hit the nail on the head with this. He said, a small innovation that can improve the lives of the mass of the population might be more economically important than a large technological discovery that benefits only the few. The true hero of economics is almost never the elite theorist. It is the everyday artisan, out there solving real local problems.
Which brings us to a highly uncomfortable question we need to ask ourselves today. Are we still blindly funding the elite myth instead of the everyday tinkerer? Have we completely forgotten how the modern world was actually built? Think about that hard truth the next time a politician demands billions for elite, theoretical research. Anyway, thanks for diving into this data with me. Keep questioning the accepted narrative, and I'll catch you in the next Explain.